Welcome to episode 79 of Real Health Radio. You can find the links talked about as part of this episode at the show notes, which is www.7, all spelled out, so seven-health.com/79.
Welcome to Real Health Radio. Health advice that's more than just about how you look. And here's your host, Chris Sandel.
Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Real Health Radio. I'm your host, Chris Sandel. So today I have another solo show, and it's just me going deep into a particular topic. And the topic of choice this time around is hormesis. And I wrote an article on hormesis in December time and said that I'd be putting together a podcast on it, and this is it. So as part of the show, I'm going to explain what hormesis is. I'm going to explain about how some of the mechanisms for it work in the body. And it is an area that still needs a lot of work, but I can at least talk about some of the things that are happening that we know about. And then I'm going to look at different ways that you can benefit from hormesis. So really the practical solutions of things that you can implement in your life so that that process takes place. And Ari Whitten is someone who really introduced me to the idea of hormesis. He talks about it extensively in his Energy Blueprint program. And when I had him last on the show, last on Real Health Radio, we chatted about it briefly. Stefan Guillenet has also written on the topic. Chris Masterjohn has also written on the topic. And Chris Masterjohn was the last guest that I had on the podcast. And I've also had Stefan Guillenet on here as well. Another guy, Todd Becker of gettingstronger.org has written a lot of information on hormesis. So it's his site is a point of reference when putting this show together. When I look at some of the articles that Stefan and Chris have written on the topic, they were released back in 2011. So I am definitely late to the party on this idea of hormesis. But I think despite the fact that they were talking about it back then, it's a concept that most people still haven't heard of. So even if I'm falling into or not falling into the early adopter category, I'm still in the early majority if I'm using the diffusion of innovation theory as an analogy. So before we get started, I just want to mention that I'm now in the final stages of taking on clients. And this is the fourth week that I've mentioned on the podcast, and this should hopefully be the last. At the time of recording this, I have just 3 spots left. And if you're interested in finding out more, you can head over to www.7, all spelled out, so seven-health.com/help, so the word help, HELP. And on that page, it'll explain the process of us working together. And at the bottom of the page, there's a link to apply for a free initial chat. And this is what I do with people before starting to work together. We chat about what's going on, what you're wanting help with. And through this discussion, we can decide if we're a good fit for one another. And consults are done via Skype and FaceTime or even phone. So even if you're not based in the UK like I am, this isn't a problem. And really the majority of my clients now are overseas in the US or Canada or Australia or Germany or Spain, etc. So if 2017 is the year that you want to finally deal with different health issues or body image or disordered eating or just generally the long list of stuff that I talk about as part of my podcast, then please get in contact. And that address again is www.7-health.com/help. So with that announcement out of the way, let's get on with the show. Probably the best place to start is explaining what the term hormesis means, especially considering most people may not have heard of the term. So hormesis is the process where a mild or acute stressor creates an adaptation in the body that leads to a positive health change. But if the stressor is taken in larger doses rather than providing health benefits, it's actually then damaging on your health. So the word stressor here can include a range of things, which I'll go into later when we're looking at the ways to encourage hormesis in the body, but it can include things that you do as well as things that you consume. So hormesis was first described back in 1888 by a German pharmacologist called Hugo Schultz, when he observed that if you stimulate the growth of yeast by giving it small doses of a poison, it would grow faster. So while most of the time you would think that small doses of a poison should start to kill off the yeast or at least stunt its growth and function, it had the opposite effect. And this is what happens in us. When the right types of poisons or activities or substances are used in the right small doses, it then leads to increased health. Better health than if we hadn't even had those substances in the first place. But for this to be working, it has to be in acute but brief exposures, so not chronic exposures. And this is a podcast, so it doesn't come with the visuals, so let me see if I can best describe it. If I were to show a graph of the benefits of a substance so that it creates a hormetic effect, it is the shape of an inverted U or an inverted J. So that would be an upside down U shape or an upside down J shape. So in the beginning, as you give a bit of a substance, it leads to a beneficial effect. And as you give a little more, the benefits increase a little more. But at some point, the graph then reaches a peak. And then now for every extra bit of that substance, the health benefits start to slip down. So you keep pushing more and then the curve starts coming back down until you're at the point at which you first started. So the same point as if you'd never had the substance. So you then have a curve there that looks like an inverted U. If you then still continue to increase the dosage, you're going to have then further negative effects. And you're now in a range where health is worse than if you'd done nothing at all. And as you continue to increase that dose, health continues to get worse. So at this stage, if you were to map out that curve, you would now have a curve that looks like an inverted J. And with hormesis, the point that it takes to go from zero to the peak of hormetic effect can be really small. So depending on the activity or the substance and depending on the individual will determine where that point lies. But really the central tenet with hormesis is that you want very small doses of a substance to increase health that would otherwise in higher amounts cause harm to the body. So I now want to look at how hormesis works in the body, and as part of this, I'll address the different benefits that it can create in various systems within the body. So in a general sense, hormesis works because of homeostasis. So homeostasis is the body's desire to bring itself back into balance and to be able to do this as effectively and efficiently as possible. So if you eat food and it increases your blood sugar, your body kicks off a chain reaction of different glands and hormones and functions with the desire to bring blood sugar back into the range that it deems acceptable, where it feels that homeostasis has been returned. Or if you, say, drink alcohol, your body turns on processes that allow you to deal with that alcohol in an attempt to get your blood levels back to normal, in an attempt to detoxify through the liver, so it can bring everything back to where they should be, you get back to a sober level. And this principle really happens with everything in the body. It is constantly striving to bring things back to where it deems an appropriate level and what it deems as homeostasis. The body, as part of doing this, it wants to be as effective and efficient as possible. So when it is challenged in certain ways, not only does it bring it back into balance, but it makes adaptions so that it is able to do this process again, and that it is even more prepared. So the next time it's then exposed to whatever that substance or whatever the stress is, it's even better at dealing with it. So let me use exercise as an example here. And exercise works because of hormesis. And I know that we typically think of exercise as this healthy thing, but the health benefits come because of the body's adaptions to the stress that we put it under, because exercise is a stress. And so if you were to look at someone's markers after they've just done some exercise and say it's quite intense exercise, you would see increased inflammation, you would see oxidative stress that would be high, you would have cortisol and adrenaline, which are stress hormones, they'd be high. There would be micro trauma in the muscle, so you've got tiny tears where the muscles have been damaged. There would be certain levels of degradation, probably in the nervous system as well. So all of these changes, like none of them are indicative of health. Most people wouldn't think that this is the types of things that you want to be doing to your body. Normally people, when seeing that list of things, think we should be trying to avoid this. And in a lot of scenarios, this would be true. But exercise then offers its health benefits because of the adaptions it then makes in the face of this assault on the body. If given the appropriate food and the appropriate rest, the body then recovers. But it doesn't recover to where it was prior to exercise. It recovers to a place that's just a little bit better. And so you then do exercise again and you get these same initial negative effects with the inflammation and with the stress hormones, etc. And then post-recovery, the body overshoots just a little bit more from where it started. And over a period of 3 months or 6 months or a year or 2 years, you make improvements that you can then notice in your exercise performance and in your fitness, etc. So you can lift more weights, you can sprint faster, you can go for longer, whatever it may be. And this is because of hormesis and the adaptions that the body makes. And so you may be then asking, how do I know if something's because of hormesis, or how do I know if something's because of that thing having health promoting properties within itself? So, for example, say you eat a food that contains magnesium. Magnesium is health promoting in its own right. Your body uses magnesium to do lots of different tasks that it can't do without it. But something like exercise, its benefits is because of its hormetic adaptation. It stimulates the process in the body where it fights against the exercise, and only through the recovery process does it provide a benefit. So I've talked generally about the adaptation process and being at the core of hormesis, but I now want to go through some of the specifics about what this can really look like. So the first adaptation that it creates is to the mitochondria. So the mitochondria are mini organs that you have in your cells, and their main role is to produce energy, and they're often referred to as the cellular power stations. And in each of your cells, you have hundreds or even a couple of thousand mitochondria. So the process of hormesis actually leads to an increase in the number of mitochondria and also an increase in the size of the mitochondria. So if you have a situation where you have more power stations and you have bigger power stations, you now have the ability to produce a lot more energy. And this is energy for you to move and think and concentrate, but also energy that your body can use for its various systems. So there's more energy to run your digestive system and your nervous system and to build bone and muscle, etc. So the next area of positive adaptions via hormesis is in the antioxidant defense system. And this was actually something I spoke about with Chris Sandel in the previous podcast, not specifically about hormesis, but about the antioxidants defense system. So if you wanted to listen to that show, you can do so by going to www.7-health.com/78. I'll put it in the show notes as well. But in a general sense, and this is what we talked about, most people's understanding of oxidants and antioxidants is incorrect. We have this notion that oxidants are bad and antioxidants are good, and if you can just take in enough antioxidants to cancel out the oxidants or the pro-oxidants, then everything will be fine. But this isn't really the case of what's going on. Oxidants are actually really important for health, and there are many processes that wouldn't happen in the body if you didn't have them. So, for example, you need oxidants to create your thyroid hormones, and we need oxidants for our immune system to be able to kill pathogens. And oxidants can be pathological. They can cause problems where their functioning is creating negative effects within the body and with health. But this is context specific. And so rather than thinking that oxidants are always bad, we need to understand the context in which they are appropriate and helpful, and in which context they then come harmful. So in our body, we have what is known as the antioxidants defense system. And when it is working as it should be, it helps to keep oxidants working in the places that they should be working. And in certain cases, this can lead to then higher amounts of oxidants. And that higher amounts of oxidants is good, but it's good because they're then contained and they are doing it in the locations that they should be. And so it is then helpful, and it's leading to a more robust immune system or better production of thyroid hormones, etc. So how does all of this link into hormesis? There are certain substances that actually trigger adaptions that improve the functioning of the antioxidants defense system as part of hormesis. So these are harmful substances that the body, in a sense, is fighting against, but because they've come into the body in those small amounts, in hormetic doses, they actually trigger our defensive barriers and mean that we have better, healthier adaptions, and we have a better antioxidant defense system. And part of the reason that this happens is due to the effect of a thing called NRF2. So NRF2 is a transcription factor in humans. So it activates certain genes in the antioxidants defense system as well as in detoxification. So this is important for liver detoxification, detoxification as a whole. But the fact that hormesis triggers and has this effect on NRF2 is part of the reason why it's so beneficial for the antioxidant defense system. So the next adaptive benefit that the body makes in relation to hormesis is an increased amount of autophagy. So autophagy is a term that is derived from the ancient Greek meaning autophagus, that means self-devouring. And it's a process whereby cells clean themselves up and recycle all the unnecessary and dysfunctional cellular components that have been accumulating within them. So basically, it's getting rid of the damaged organelles, which are the mini cells, the cell's mini organs, and any unused proteins. And this is how cells stay healthy and function well. At some point, the cell will become old and they will be completely broken down. But over its lifespan, if it can be continually getting rid of the old and broken parts and replacing it with new parts that work as they should be, this leads to better functioning cells. And because cells make up tissues, tissues make up organs, organs make up systems, and systems make up your whole body, if your cells are working well, then your health should also be working well. So having this increased autophagy because of hormesis is great for how your cells work. Another positive adaptation because of hormesis is the creation of a thing called heat shock proteins. So while they have, or heat shock proteins has the word heat in the title, this is only because under heat was how they were first identified. So heat shock proteins are actually expressed in response to cold as well, in response to UV, during wound healing and tissue remodeling. So the word heat doesn't mean that there just has to be heat. There can be other circumstances. And the benefit of heat shock proteins is that they help other proteins in the cell to stabilize and to fold correctly. They also play a role similar to autophagy by carrying old proteins in the cell to a recycling bin. Heat shock proteins also create positive changes in cardiovascular health and in immunity. And it can even help with brain health. And there's some rat research looking at the benefits of how exposure to cold can help with delaying Alzheimer's development and how this relates to heat shock proteins. So hopefully that gives you some of or an idea of some of the ways in which hormesis is working within the body. And obviously there are other benefits that we can notice, and I'll talk about these shortly, but that's it for things we know in detail in terms of how certain processes work, or at least that I'm covering as part of this show. So I now want to talk about the different things that you can do that create a hormetic effect within the body. And this can be either certain activities or certain things that you eat or drink or consume. But before I do this, I just want to offer a couple of caveats to this stuff. The first is something I've already mentioned, but I want to mention it again. Hormesis works by providing a small dose that leads to better health. And the emphasis here is on small dose. With everything I'm going to list, there is a dose where this is helpful and a wide dose where it is not helpful. So please don't do the normal thing that people do with health advice, which is read that something is good or hear that something is good, and then think that if they do more of that, it becomes really good or even better. Hormesis follows, as I said before, the inverted J curve. It's not a linear shape. So if you apply the more is better approach, you then get into the area where it is then damaging. And a second point then connected to this is the dose is dependent on where your health is at. It's not something that is set in stone. So as health improves, you can have more of a certain substance or you can do more of an activity before it reaches a peak. But this is dependent on you. And the opposite is also true. If health is poor, the amount of hormesis should also be small. Otherwise, you'll very quickly enter into the realm of it not helping but harming. And this is because you need to have the ability to then benefit from the chain of reactions that hormesis creates. So I talked about increased mitochondria or an upregulated antioxidant defense system or increased detoxification. But these processes require certain vitamins and minerals. You need protein, you need other macronutrients, you need glutathione. There needs to be enough of these raw materials for you to be able to benefit. Otherwise, hormesis won't ensue. You'll just get poor health. So really understanding that there has to be a certain level of available energy, of resources, etc., to be able to benefit from this stuff. And I talked about this recently in an article about working out what is important for you. And focusing on hormesis is going to be a helpful strategy for many people, while for lots of people, it's going to be a complete waste of time. And if you are struggling with disordered eating or an eating disorder, then honestly, this podcast really isn't for you. Maybe it's great to help you expand your knowledge, but as a practical solution, it's probably pointless. Your real issues lie elsewhere, and this is what you should be focusing on. And so I know that hormesis may sound like something that is important for your health and something you want to try out, but please first ask yourself, is this really where I should be focusing my attention? Because for some people it is, but for a lot of people it's not. So with these caveats out of the way, let me discuss different forms of hormesis. So I've already mentioned exercise, so let's start with this. Overall, exercise has a hormetic effect on the body, and this is why we see the risk and occurrence of disease go down as movement and exercise levels increase. So generally, exercise, regardless of what it is, will be improving health, and largely because of the hormetic effect of it. If I'm then looking at some specific exercises, it's the ones that kind of cause more of a stress or more of a shock to the system that create a stronger hormetic response. So lifting heavy weights is going to have more of a hormetic effect on your muscles and your nervous system and your cardiovascular system. And because of the adaptions as part of recovery, it then improves your health. Exercise that leads to oxygen deficit is also very beneficial. So things like sprinting or short bursts on a spin bike could achieve this, or something like high intensity interval training. And probably why a lot of the research looking at high intensity interval training does so well is because of hormesis, but it only does so well, again, if people are doing it in short bursts, if people are able to recover from it properly. Oxygen deficit doesn't necessarily have to come from exercise, so creating an oxygen deficit can be helpful for hormesis even outside of exercise. So going to higher altitude where the air is thinner can lead to oxygen deficit. There are different breathing exercises that could be done that could then lead to oxygen deficit, and this can provide a hormetic effect. Short but extreme changes in body temperature is another form of hormesis. So starting with heat, something like a sauna is a great way of increasing the heat shock proteins that I talked about before. It helps to repair muscle damage, it increases muscle density, it increases things like growth hormone and improves insulin sensitivity. And the amount of literature supporting the benefits of sauna is like large and growing. And maybe not all of this is due to hormesis, but it is something that is associated greatly with it. And if you live somewhere that is hot, or hot during the summertime where you're getting into those higher temperatures, you can also get the benefit here of the heat shock proteins from spending time out in this heat. And you want to make sure you're not getting burnt, but heat will foster this hormetic effect. It doesn't have to be just in a sauna. At the other end of the temperature spectrum is cold therapy. So doing cold showers or alternating with hot and cold showers can be helpful. Doing plunge pools or swimming in a pool or a sea where the temperature is really low. Spending time where you walk into like a walk-in refrigerator can be one. Or, taking it even further extremes, using ice baths. And I know these have become very popular with lots of sports people to help with muscle recovery. And part of the reason for this is hormesis. Cold is great for regulating mood and fighting depression. It increases the antioxidants defense system, the immune system, muscle recovery, emotional resilience, to name just a few things. And just like my comments about living in a hot climate, the same if you live somewhere where it gets cold in the wintertime. If temperatures are getting really low, or maybe where it snows, spending time in this environment in minimal clothing so the body really feels the cold will lead to a hormetic adaptation. Again, you want to do this in small amounts of dose, so however long it's going to be, depending on you and depending on how cold it is in your situation. But that can be beneficial. Thinking about this stuff, Wim Hof is someone who comes to mind with this. He's a Dutch guy who's been nicknamed the Iceman, and he holds a load of insane records and done lots of crazy feats. He holds the record for the longest time spent in an ice bath, which is 1 hour, 44 minutes. He climbed to 22,000 feet altitude of Mount Everest, wearing nothing but shorts and shoes. He climbed Mount Kilimanjaro and completed a full marathon above the Arctic Circle in Finland, both of those dressed in nothing but shorts. But he's also great with withstanding heat. He ran a full marathon in the Namib Desert without water, and temperatures can get as high as 45 degrees Celsius. There's a really great Vice documentary on Wim Hof that I'll link to in the show notes so you can discover a little bit more about him. I think it's half an hour, 40 minutes, or something like that, but it's really interesting, and a lot of what he does in one form or another is down to hormesis, or that's where he's getting a lot of the benefits from. Radiation would be the next form of hormesis, and there are a number of things that fall under this bracket of radiation. So ionizing radiation, things like X-rays at high doses is clearly harmful, leads to cancer, premature aging, lots of other problems. But under the right conditions and using low dose amounts, there is evidence to show that it leads to decreased cancer risk and increased resistance to other stresses. And I'm not suggesting you start taking X-rays for its hormetic benefits. Truthfully, I wouldn't know what the dose should be, and I'm not sure if the risk versus reward ratio is really there, but I did want to mention it just because it falls into the category of hormesis. But low-level radiation from living at higher altitude, on the other hand, does seem like a safer option. And I know before I mentioned about being at higher altitude because it's helpful for oxygen deficit, but the same is true for the radiation levels at that higher altitude. But for those who don't want to live at high altitudes, you can benefit from the hormetic effect of radiation through UV light. So I know there has been a strong campaign to smear UV light and tell everyone to cover up unless you want to get skin cancer, but it isn't so black and white. And in appropriate doses, UV is very helpful. And the reason that we create vitamin D and cholesterol sulfate and we increase melanin in the skin in the presence of sunlight or UV light is because of hormesis. And the knock-on effect of these things is improved immunity, bone growth, increased mood, decreased inflammation, improved detoxification, and more. So getting adequate UV light and the hormetic effect of it is really good. So far, we've looked at things that are to do with your body or outside sources that then impact on the body. For the last part, I want to look at things that you can eat or consume or different patterns of eating that can then lead to hormesis. So the first is polyphenol-rich food. So polyphenols are compounds that are found in plants. And in plants, they have many functions. They modulate the growth hormones in the plants. They help with plant pigmentation and preventing UV damage. It's used as a signaling molecule for ripening and also as a defense mechanism. So the polyphenols are mildly toxic substances that are meant to discourage microbes or herbivores or omnivores, so ourselves and other animals and insects and other creatures, from eating them. And the reason is because if they are then eaten, they will lead to sickness or even death. But over the millennia that we've evolved alongside these plants, and despite the polyphenols being their defenses, we've actually learned how to deal with these substances. So they no longer cause sickness in us, and we can now benefit from them. So what foods contain polyphenols? I'm going to link to a page in the show notes that contains the full list for anyone who is interested, because it is fairly extensive. And this is the Wikipedia page that lists all of the different types of polyphenols. But if I'm going to just mention a handful of things and things that have been well researched. You have catechins, which are in green tea, in white tea, in black tea, in grapes and cacao. You have sulforaphane, which is found in cruciferous vegetables, so things like broccoli, sprouts, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, cauliflower, bok choy, kale, collards, Chinese broccoli, rab, kohlrabi, mustard, turnip, radishes, and watercress. You have allicin, which is found in onions and shallots and Chinese chives and leeks. And then other foods that are rich in polyphenols are red wine, turmeric, blueberries and berries in general, extra virgin olive oil, soy, coffee, and a number of traditional medicinal herbs, so things like medicinal mushrooms and adaptogenic herbs. And like I said, I'm going to link to the whole list so you can have a look through that if you're interested. And a lot of the time when people talk about the properties of these foods, they refer to them as antioxidants. And this isn't really the case, because while these foods may have some antioxidant compounds in them, they are in such tiny amounts that their health benefits can't be attributed to them. So the actions aren't coming from the antioxidants, the actions are actually coming from hormesis. So I said earlier that these are plant defense mechanisms and that they are mildly toxic substances. And when you look at how the body reacts to them, it becomes apparent that this is really true. So Chris Mastodon talked about in a recent video where he was looking specifically at EC, which is a polyphenol compound in green tea. And they were looking at an experiment with 8 volunteers and what happened within the body and the processes and digestion, etc., when they had that substance. So when they were given the EC, less than half the dose was initially absorbed. What was absorbed, a small amount, was immediately spat back out into the intestines to be excreted. About half of what is absorbed is then excreted into the bile to be removed from the body, and only about 20% reaches general circulation. And of this amount, nearly a quarter of it is excreted from the urine within 24 hours. So you have a situation where this is a substance that the body is trying to reject by its digestive system, by detoxification system, and because of those processes, it also turns on the antioxidant defense system. It shows really that the body is trying to do its best to get rid of this substance. But just like I explained with exercise, this assault by polyphenols over the long run then leads to adaptions that then lead to improvements in the body's baseline. And it leads to improvements in things like longevity and reduced risk and occurrence of things like cardiovascular disease and diabetes and cancer. But what it means is these things aren't helpful in and of themselves. So it's not like magnesium or vitamin C, which is helpful in of itself. It's helpful because of the adaptions it then turns on within the body. And one comment I will make around polyphenols and digestion is with digestion, the reason that it might be in lower amounts and why you're digesting so little of the polyphenols may be because of the role that they play in the digestive system. And this is a role that could be actually linked to the antioxidants qualities. And this is something that Stephan Guyenet brought up in one of his articles, and I'm just going to directly quote from him. So he said, "There is a place in the body where polyphenols are concentrated enough to be direct antioxidants, and this is in the digestive tract after consuming polyphenol-rich foods. Digestion is a chemically harsh process that readily oxidizes ingested substances such as polyunsaturated fats. Oxidized fats is neither healthy when it's formed in the deep fryer nor than when it's formed in the digestive tract. Eating polyphenol-rich foods extensively or effectively prevents these fats from being oxidized during digestion. One consequence of this appears to be better absorption and assimilation of the exceptionally fragile omega-3 polyunsaturated fatty acids." So that quote shows that the polyphenols probably have a dual purpose. And although they can't be showing their antioxidant properties across the board, and that's not the only reason why you're getting better, within the digestive system, those antioxidant properties are seeming to be helpful, but the benefits are largely because of their hormetic effect. And another characteristic of polyphenols is they act as or similar to, it's called a dietary restriction mimetic. So the term mimetic typically means imitation. So it imitates the effect of dietary restriction. And as I'll talk about in a little bit, fasting and intermittent fasting is another form of hormesis. But you can get a similar physiological effect to fasting by eating polyphenols. So really one of the best ways to experience hormesis on a regular basis is to be eating foods that are rich in polyphenols. So that includes all the things that I mentioned earlier on. So moving on from polyphenols to how you structure your eating for hormesis. So fasting is something that has a hormetic effect on the body. So having a gap of just 12 to 14 hours can greatly increase autophagy. So if you had breakfast at 8 a.m. and then your last food at, say, 7 p.m. in the evening, this would be considered fasting or intermittent fasting, and you would get the hormetic effect. So fasting for longer periods can be even more beneficial. So having a full day where you don't eat, or having a number of days in a row. And I just want to say that I'm giving this suggestion with caution. So yes, there is research to show the hormetic benefits of fasting, but you also need to know yourself and have self-awareness. If you have a history of disordered eating, then please don't attempt to do this. Whatever supposed benefit you may get will be completely eroded if that starts to lead you back down a disordered path in terms of eating. And same if you aren't in great health and you need regular energy coming in. as I mentioned earlier, we need to have the resources or the raw materials for this to work properly. So something like this is probably better for someone who is further along. And you don't have to do it. So despite knowing the benefits of this, I'm not someone who does regular fasts or really does fast at all. At some point, I may start to try it, but I currently don't do it. So don't feel that you have to. The final option is then macronutrient cycling. So instead of eating a balanced mixed diet all the time, you can have times where you have higher amounts of certain macronutrients and lower amounts of others. So having a day where you go very low carb, and then having a day where you go very low fat, and then having a different day where you go very low protein. So restricting the macronutrients is another way to get that hormonic effect and the improved health. But again, know yourself. If this is the kind of thing that is going to lead to disordered eating habits, then it is not for you. So that is it for today's show. I hope you now have a better understanding of what hormesis is, why it's important, and different ways that you can be encouraging it within your body. You're probably doing some of these things already without even knowing about hormesis, but you can now have more specific ideas if you're wanting to increase this. So next week, I will be back with another guest. Until then, have a fantastic time, and I'll catch you at the next show.
Thanks for listening to Real Health Radio. If you are interested in more details, you can find them at the 7 Health website. That's www.7health.com.